during a short walk from his workplace on Fort Benning to the segregated blacks-only section of the base, Private Felix Hall disappeared. On January 1, 1922, Felix Hall was born in Millbrook, Alabama, a rural town 11 miles north of Montgomery. When Felix was 3 years old, his mother died of tuberculosis. When Hall's father moved to Montgomery, Alabama to search for work, Felix and his 2 brothers were left in Millbrook to be raised by their grandmother. The only work for a black teenager in Millbrook, Alabama at the time was picking cotton. With this in mind, Hall went to a recruiting station in Montgomery in August 1940 to enlist in the Army at the age of 18. Assigned to Fort Benning in neighboring Georgia, he would join the 24th Infantry Regiment, one of the first all-black military units formed after the Civil War. Hall reportedly enjoyed his first few months away from home. He appeared happy and content in the Army and in his social life. In his journal, he kept a list of every girl he was sweet on. He occasionally met women while out on the town. Even though he enjoyed getting a drink at bars in the evenings, he was never observed to be intoxicated. He enjoyed conversing with everyone, black or white. Hall reported for duty as usual on February 12 at the sawmill where he had been detailed by the Army and tasked with maintaining the fire. After his shift was over, Hall told his 2 friends he was going to the Post Exchange, the black-only facility on the segregated base, where he could order a hot meal and eat it at the counter. The Post Exchange was in clear view of the sawmill, but Felix never arrived. Hall was last seen alive in the all-white neighborhood of Block W. This neighborhood consisted of about 30 small houses arranged on a strip of land between railroad tracks and a swampy field. Mostly non-commissioned officers lived there. The next morning was the first time in his military career that Hall didn't report for duty. Felix wasn't the type of soldier to disappear, but nearly a month after he vanished, the Army declared him a deserter. In reports compiled by the FBI and the War Department, there is no mention of investigators asking Hall's friends and cousins if they searched for him after he vanished or if they suspected foul play. On the morning of March 28, 1941, an engineer regiment conducting training exercises in the woods discovered Felix Hall's body. Hall's body was barely out of sight the entire time. It was only a 15-minute walk from the busy post center. Residents of the post frequently went hunting for food or sport in the woods. On the morning of March 28, 1941, an engineer regiment conducting training exercises in the woods discovered Felix Hall's body. On April 8, a doctor at Fort Benning declared Hall's death to be a homicide. Later, the FBI came to the conclusion that there were several attackers. According to the FBI report, it does not appear that one man could have committed the crime based on the position of the body and the location in which it was found. Nevertheless, for the following 4 months, the War Department and Fort Benning officials misled the public by claiming that they were looking into the possibility that Hall's death was a suicide. On April 14, the elevator operator at 409 Edgecombe Avenue in Harlem arrived at work carrying a leaflet he had picked up that morning outside the Brooklyn subway. It featured a hand-drawn illustration of Felix Hall in uniform hanging from a tree by a noose. The elevator operator handed the leaflet to Walter White, the executive secretary of the NAACP. White wrote to President Franklin Roosevelt and Secretary of War Henry Stimson, rebuking them for the suggestion that Hall's death was a suicide and demanding an investigation. The FBI ultimately identified 3 suspects in the lynching. The men lived in Block W, where Hall was last seen alive. Sergeant Henry Green was their first suspect. At the time, Green's next-door neighbor, Ms. Thompson, claimed that Green had been waiting with a shotgun outside his home, ready to shoot a colored peeping Tom who had been bothering the residents. The day that Hall vanished, Green and his brother-in-law, Sergeant Ace Millard Allison, were off from work. The FBI came up with the theory that the 2 men spent the entire day drinking at Green's home and kidnapped Hall as he passed by on his way to the Post Exchange. Henry Green acknowledged having a gun and having threatened to shoot any black peeping Tom who approached his window. However, he denied waiting outside for one and denied any complicity in Hall's murder. The third suspect was Sergeant James Hodges. Hall frequently walked between the sawmill and his barracks along the same path that Hodges' residence was located. The FBI claims that Hall was last seen alive close to Hodges' residence. Head of the military police at Fort Benning and Provost Marshal Captain Marvin Coyle thought Hodges had a reason to commit this crime in the manner in which it was committed. However, the investigation report still has 2 paragraphs that describe Hodges' potential motivation redacted. In order to prevent the disclosure of information that would be viewed as an unjustified invasion of personal privacy, the FBI continues to withhold this information. Dorothy Carter, Hodges' eldest living child, wasn't surprised when told during the interview that her father had been a lynching suspect. "I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't doubt it at all," she said. She added, if a group got together, he would have been right in the middle of it saying, "Let's go, let's go." He was a coward. He wouldn't have done it on his own, but if a group was going, he would have been right in the middle of it. Soldiers claimed that Henry Smith, the white foreman at the sawmill who was a civilian, had threatened to kill Hall the day before he vanished. 5 soldiers told investigators that Hall had been in a fight with his boss. Several named Smith, but none claimed to have witnessed the encounter. Private Willie Ellison reported to the FBI that he'd heard from 2 people that Smith had threatened to kill Hall if he did not call him sir. In an FBI report, Sergeant Osei Goldsby said that Felix Hall was planning to desert the army because he was afraid of a foreman by the name of Smith. Apparently Smith had threatened to kill Hall because the victim and other soldiers had been teasing him. Private Willie Smith reported that Hall said his boss had threatened to strike him and that to defend himself, Felix picked up a cant hook, a long metal pole with a hook at the end used for handling logs. Private James Arthur said he heard that Hall was ordered not to return to work. 5 white individuals, including 4 civilian sawmill workers and 1 soldier, on the other hand, claimed to be unaware of a fight between Hall and Henry Smith. Henry Smith stated to an FBI agent that he was unaware of Felix Hall's identity until after his death. He claimed to be unable to recall the last time he had seen Hall at work, that he had never engaged in conflict with a black soldier, and that he did not supervise black soldiers. The clerk and sawmill manager agreed with Smith's account. There is no indication that the FBI followed up on the information provided by the black soldiers, even though the investigation file notes these various accounts. No attempt was made to clarify what happened at the mill by asking additional questions of the witnesses or by making any other attempt to separate the truth from the conflicting accounts. Henry Smith, who died in 1951, was never named as a suspect. Decades after the murder, Hall's relatives still talk about his reputation as a bit of a Romeo. His cousin James Fenderson was only 6 when Hall died but grew up hearing that Hall had flirted across the color line, which could easily get a black man lynched in the South. Hall was known to speak with white people of both genders and all ages, more casually than was considered appropriate at the time, Fenderson recalled. Pearl Follett was 12 years old at the time of Felix Hall's murder. Her family resided in the Bradley area of the base. She also heard the rumor that Felix was killed because he had his eye on a white woman. In an interview, she said she remembered the spring day in 1941 when her stepfather, Army Sergeant Howard Gillespie, a World War I veteran, came home after hunting in the woods. As soon as he was through the door, he told her mother that he'd found the body of a black man. "It is stuck in my mind that he was afraid," Follett said. "That really stuck in my mind. Why was he afraid? He wasn't afraid of anything." The earlier find by Follett's stepfather is not mentioned in the FBI investigation file. Follett recalled that her sister said that the neighbors had told them not to discuss it. They were supposed to keep silent when things like this happen. There is no known grave marker for Felix Hall. His death certificate does not state where he died. His grandmother Sarah Hall and father James Hall each received $1,000 from the life insurance company, paid out in roughly $30 monthly installments, and $5,000 each from the government. James Fenderson is one of the last living relatives who knew Hall. When Fenderson was 15, his mother warned him against becoming too friendly with a white boy in Millbrook and used Hall's death as a life lesson. She told me, "Baby Jim, don't hang around with that white boy, because you'll get in trouble." His mother and other older relatives told Fenderson that Hall's ghost still roamed the railroad tracks in Millbrook.